welcome all for Day with FMZ, a global initiative to bring in leadership perspective, understand the best practices across the globe, and we also have education series to bring in education bites, which gives you a little bit of information on all aspects of the facility management. And part of the leadership series we have Dean. Today we're going to cover on net zero, and I also have my co-host Lisa. Welcome, Lisa and Dean.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And welcome to Dean. Thank you so much for coming back to talk with us again.
Sure.
We got a good list of questions to go over, so we'll just jump right on in. We were talking about carbon neutrality. What does that really look like?
Okay, well, let's start with what net zero actually means. So net zero refers to achieving a balance between the amount of greenhouse gas emissions produced and the amount being removed from the atmosphere. So there's two paths to achieving net zero that work in tandem. One is reducing existing emissions, and the other is actively removing greenhouse gases. So the term net zero is a bit intimidating as it conjures up kind of a vision of we have to move from our current state to a net zero state in one giant step. But in reality, this transition is going to really occur in phases. And also the technologies for large-scale carbon removal do not yet exist, but progress is being made. So for the most part, when we talk about net zero in the present day, we're actually just referring to net zero emissions. And the term carbon neutral would really imply an entity has avoided or removed as much carbon from the atmosphere as it is produced or caused. But in many cases, when an entity claims to be carbon neutral, they mean the energy consumed was produced by carbon neutral sources, which is not the whole of the embodied and operational carbon emissions attributable to their business.
Vinay, I think you're muted.
You're on mute, Vinay. Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Thank you, Dean. I think it sets a base for us to look at what is a carbon neutrality or a net zero. I think if you have to look at from a strategies point, what are the strategies the companies are employing or adopting, which are trying to reach the carbon neutrality?
Well, of course, the most obvious place to start is with activities directly within your span of control. That would include any opportunities to reduce, avoid, or offset carbon emissions. Within building operations, reduction opportunities include any system upgrades where you can reduce energy consumption, or structural enhancements where you can improve the building's energy performance. And in terms of avoidance, the most carbon neutral building is the one that's not built. So avoidance strategies may be more challenging, but you might look at purchasing options that minimize the transport component or bulk purchase options where you minimize packaging requirements. These are small but meaningful steps towards carbon neutrality. So carbon offsets are mechanisms to purchase the rights for verifiable carbon reductions to offset emissions that can't be eliminated from a business operation. That's the sort of the last path component and should not be a majority of an entity's carbon neutral reporting.
That makes a lot of sense. How does an organization go about proving carbon neutrality?
There are proposed standards emerging that would enable the auditability for carbon or net zero or carbon neutral claims. But up to now, carbon organizations have been publishing a corporate social responsibility or CSR report. But the elephant in the room was that there was no means to verify the claims made in these CSR reports, which led to many allegations of greenwashing. Now we see an interest in the environmental, social, and governance, or ESG reporting. And ESG seeks to impose standards and auditability on the corporate carbon emissions and sustainability reporting. Recently, the Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, released a proposed mandate for ESG disclosure requirements. Now, while the SEC's intent is really to protect investors, it has the attention of publicly traded companies. If these rules go into effect, they will also impact private companies as well. we can anticipate that industry leaders like Walmart and Target are going to require the same level of disclosure from their suppliers to ensure that they can meet their reporting requirements. So even though the SEC mandates may only be targeting publicly traded companies, the trickle down is going to involve the private companies as well. As far as how do we prove carbon claims, there's a number of possible components. We have the ISO 14064 standard for greenhouse gas emission inventories. There is the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD. There's the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, or SASB. The Global Reporting Initiative, which is GRI. And then the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, goal ambitions. So we can anticipate that some combination of these frameworks will emerge as the initial reporting standard, and that will probably evolve over a period of time.
Thank you, Dean. I think it gives us very few critical points about bringing in standards. And also ESG has become a global norm now. I think, as you rightly said about Walmart, it's not just about the initiatives you have taken related to achieving this, but also how your suppliers are impacting this is also very, very important. But one of the things that we keep hearing about is typically, is this carbon neutral is very limited to the new buildings, or it can be adopted to the under construction or existing building? I think most of them have this theory. Can it be applied across the new buildings or the under construction or already existing building?
That's a good question. And certainly, new construction, it's where LEED kind of started out. They started out by saying we wanted to have a standard so that if we are building new buildings, they're as efficient as we can get. But the fact is we still have, 99.9% of our building stock is existing buildings. So when discussing carbon emissions, we have to look at really two factors. There's embodied carbon and operational carbon. So embodied carbon is really the sum total of the carbon emissions required to produce a product or construct a building. It's really in the process of construction where you add up all of the carbon attributable to the materials and the finished products utilized in that construction project. Once the project is complete, the structure will have an embodied carbon value, which is represented as a global warming potential, or GWP. You'll hear that term more coming as we move forward in time. But that's really all of the carbon generated in its construction. So that's embodied carbon. Operational carbon is all the carbon emissions generated in the day-to-day operation of the structure, including energy consumed, water, waste, transportation, etc. So taken together, embodied carbon plus operational carbon plus decommissioning carbon represents the life cycle carbon cost of a structure. So operational carbon is typically about 80% or more of the life cycle carbon cost. And achieving carbon neutrality in an existing building is possible, but you generally have to dismiss some of the original embodied carbon, as there's no reliably accurate methods to calculate those original values. But with a full building retrofit, you can generate a carbon neutral design and then consider the building to be carbon neutral from a point in time going forward. So it can be applicable to existing buildings as well as new construction.
That's good news. It's hard for FMs to even know where to start. That sort of gives hope. Does carbon neutrality require some specific modifications and different actions from its occupants?
Oh, absolutely. When we talk about net zero carbon, I said, you have to take into account the occupants. So unless they stop breathing, they're still producing CO2, right? So we need to take some of those things into account. So how do you expect people to behave differently in a new environment if you haven't shared with them what's expected of them? So in a high performance building, there will be many subtle differences that occupants might miss unless they're pointed out to them. So there will be smart building controls that manage lighting and window shades, based on available ambient light, things like that. And sub-occupants may need more light to function effectively. But that doesn't mean they should be able to override the controls and turn up all the lights on the floor. Instead, you should be providing some localized accommodations. So occupants should be advised of what is expected in regards to things like recycling, turning off desk lighting and monitors when they leave the area, minimizing the number of personal devices left in sort of a permanent charging state. And unless they own an electric vehicle, they should be encouraged to utilize lower carbon transportation alternatives like carpooling and public transit. The National Renewable Energy Labs, or NREL, located in Golden, Colorado, is one of the most energy efficient campuses you'll find anywhere. However, when they constructed their 360,000 square foot research support facility, they created a training program for the employees on how to be a sustainable occupant of the building. Now, you might be tempted to think that energy researchers would know this stuff already, but not necessarily. That's not their day job. They're busy with their day job, but they did not necessarily know how to be a good building steward. So you have to think about these kind of things in advance because they're neither intuitive nor obvious.
I was actually fortunate enough to tour NREL soon after they had opened part of their smart campus. And they talked at great length about the learning that had gone on in the occupants about how to live in that building and how to make it effective.
Yes, they did. They did several things with their program. They even developed a small little app that ran on people's desktop, and it set up in the corner, and it was little, smiley face, neutral face, frowny face. And so it was things like, how's the temperature? And you could just click the button and say it's fine, it's not fine. And awesome. They would use that as a sort of almost passive means of collecting data on how things were going at any given point in time, and they could make adjustments sort of in real time rather than trying to do surveys or wait for somebody to submit a work order and things like that. So that was innovative as well. They were, taking a forward look about how do I measure one particular item in a very easy to use way without interrupting people, to do it.
Cool.
I think well articulated, Dean. I think if I have to summarize what you said is it's not just about driving initiatives, but how do you bring in belongingness with the employees is very, very important because it's not just an FM driving it, it's the whole organization, how everybody bringing their belongingness, creating that impact and showing and demonstrating that to an employee, hey, this is what you have created, what is your contribution back to the environment. I think those things will definitely drive, that's engagement initiatives which are very, very critical for an FM to succeed in driving these scenarios. And even now people talk about the net zero is still a theory or is practically possible. I think from your experience, then what are the case studies or examples of carbon neutral facilities or organization you know of?
I got about, 3 examples because they kind of represent some different things. So in January 2020, IFMA strategic partner ASHRAE began a $20 million renovation project on its new global headquarters building located in Peachtree Corners, Georgia. This is a building that was built in 1978. So the existing 66,000 square foot building on 11 acres of land became a demonstration project intended to prove the economic viability of a net zero operation. An important part of getting to net zero is the low energy consumption of the building. So it has a low EUI of 21 kBTUs per square foot per year, while maintaining excellent ventilation and indoor air quality. They have 332 kilowatts of PV panel systems. So it's a great example of how to reduce grid energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions in an older existing building to create a sustainable and innovative environment. Another one, go back to the National Renewable Energy Lab. So 362,000 square feet. It's Department of Energy. So if you're not familiar, the DOE operates 17 national labs, of which the National Renewable Energy Lab is one of the 17. Again, located in Golden, Colorado. It's an award-winning model for LEED Platinum net zero and high-performance building design that incorporates the best energy efficiency and environmental performance technologies and practices in a large-scale commercial office building. Now, it was completed in 2010, and at that time, it was the largest net zero building and a groundbreaking example of energy efficiency and sustainable design. They used an innovative design build process, and NREL demonstrated that the whole building integrated design process can be used to achieve net zero at scale. Now, another example is a building called The Edge. It was designed by PLP Architecture. It's a 431,000 square foot building in Amsterdam, and it's a headquarters for the consulting firm Deloitte. And it was elected the greenest office building in the world. In 2015, it was awarded a BREEAM rating of 98, which was the highest score ever achieved at the time. The building features a kind of a remarkable mix of technologies like passive temperature control and an energy efficient design. The interior doesn't look architecturally innovative. It simply resembles a giant glass house, though the south-facing facade is entirely covered with invisible window-like solar panels. There's an aquifer thermal energy storage system that's been installed deep underneath the soil to power the heating and cooling system of the building when passive ventilation isn't sufficient, and rainwater is collected and used to flush the toilets and irrigate the green areas. So there are many other examples out there, but these represent sort of a range of project types, including new construction, design build construction, and an existing building retrofit. So net zero can be achieved following many different paths.
It's exciting to see that there are sort of big picture and very visible successes like this. It makes you think that we really can get there. Is
Yes.
there a step beyond? Is there something beyond carbon neutral that's regenerative?
Well, in the early days of LEED, a concept was formulated around moving to a regenerative state. It's a scenario where more energy is produced than consumed, and any raw materials taken from the earth are replaced. So, the earth would be in a persistent state of equilibrium at that point. So prior to the rise of humans, nature sort of maintained this equilibrium on its own, but humans upset this delicate balance. And the question is whether we have the will and the ability to restore it. It will be technologically possible to generate more energy than we consume, but restoring the balance of nature is yet another mountain to climb. So I would hope that humanity has sort of the collective will to reduce atmospheric CO2 and avoid the most disastrous effects of climate change. And if we can pull that off, we can then start to climb that regenerative mountain.
Hope abounds.
Yes.
More than fingers crossed. Thank you so very much.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Vinay, you're muted.
You're muted again. Okay.
So I think it's everybody's responsibility as an individual. As we talk about humanity, I think we have a moral responsibility towards our environment to contribute. It's not just about IT companies or the facilitates managing this. I think let's all come together forward and contribute in a way it can make difference and leave this place livable for future generation. And let's use lesser of natural resources. Let's look at the alternate energy sources. And it's important for us to reduce the carbon emission because now we have seen the globalization, the temperature is increasing year on year. I think let's contribute together. Thank you, Dean, for your great insights. I think your knowledge is creating an impact. I think the essence we take from you is that how we can spread across. Definitely, we'll have many more on the ESG itself. I think this is a topic where every organization is now focusing on. And thank you, Lisa. And keep watching us a day with FMZ. And if you have any specific topics you want to discuss and you want any leaders to be on this, please write to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.